Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Chris Leatham. Welcome to another episode of The Economy and You here at Think Tech Hawaii. Today's guest, we're going to be talking to Mr. Hukari. Mr. Hukari, I want to thank you for being here, Think Tech. And you go by Harvey. Harvey's your first name.
That's correct.
Yes, and
thanks for giving my surname a Japanese intonation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it makes me feel a little bit more local. So that's fine.
It's not Hukari, it's
Hukari.
Hukari.
Yes.
Yeah, so local style we might say Hukari.
Okay.
But thank you for being on the show today.
All right.
Yeah, and here at Think Tech, we bring on guests of all who are engaged in the sort of political onslaught here in Hawaii and on the mainland. And you go back and forth between here and San Francisco.
Correct.
You are a political consultant, and you've been doing this for quite a while now.
I've been working in Hawaii since the mid-'80s. I first came here as the regional political director for the Republican National Committee. I was in charge of the political operations for the National Party in a number of Western or Pacific Rim states. And so that's what brought me to Hawaii originally. Back in 1984 was the Reagan-Bush presidential campaign, the re-election. And I began working as an independent consultant in 1985. So
Okay.
my history goes back with a lot of political figures that you may be familiar with.
Ross Perot.
Not Ross Perot.
Not Ross Perot.
Wrong guess, but no, going back to Congresswoman Pat Psyche.
Yes.
I did her first, her two congressional campaigns. I ended up doing a direct mail for Mayor Frank Fosse, one of his re-elections, and then also with Mufi Hanneman, two of his mayoral campaigns.
That was recently.
Yes, well, this century.
Yes,
anyway.
yes, okay. So now you're back in Hawaii, and of course there's been a lot of changes in the Republican Party. This year has been particularly tumultuous. We've seen, I think, probably one of the most interesting Republican primaries that we've had in a very long time.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm here specifically in this period is to watch how the Republican caucuses developed and unfolded, and had a very successful Tuesday, March 8th. Great turnout that exceeded the previous presidential caucus turnout. Looks like we'll end up with maybe 13,000, 14,000 people that actually bothered to go out and vote.
To go out and vote, yeah. That's great. That's great to see.
Yeah.
You know, I talked to a lot of young people out there today, and a lot of them have abdicated their role as a voter. And I've heard every excuse under the sun. And they're not involved in politics. Let somebody else do it. It's not their job. You know, that their one vote doesn't count. But ultimately, I think it does. And I think there is that abdication of your responsibility as a voter if you're not engaged, at least in the voting process. You know, if somebody were to say, look, if you don't vote again tomorrow, you're never going to get a vote again, I think you'd find more people that would step up and vote.
I think it also relates to a broader issue, and that is civic engagement. The people that don't vote, I suspect, are not that interested in public affairs, are not involved in perhaps community affairs to a great extent. And it may be a reflection of change in culture, demographics. I think we're still in a very unsettled period that relates not simply to politics, but to culture, communications, the rapid development of technology as it affects our daily lives.
And that's the very thing that troubles me. You know, for the first time in the history of humanity, we've got access to just about any piece of information we would want. You know, and you would think now that we have the capacity to absorb that information or to get access to that information, that we would be more inclined to participate because we'd have access to the information that would help us make useful decisions. And yet we see, at least here in Hawaii, we see less and less voters historically engaging in the voting process.
And that's an interesting pattern because when Hawaii first became a state, voting was new, obviously, and turnout ratios were much, much higher. Turnout percentages were much, much higher. And they gradually declined to to the point where now it's somewhat of an embarrassment, the low rate of participation.
It is. And I wonder if it's because we have such a dominated system. We have the one party, or the Democratic Party, Democratic machine, maybe you want to call it, has just sort of monopolized the legislature. And so I'm wondering if a lot of people go, well, the Democrats are going to win anyway, therefore, me voting against them is futile.
Well, that's definitely part of the phenomena, which is the lack of competition.
Yes.
So here's what happens in presidential years, is that you get people that are watching national broadcast, cable news networks, whatever, and so they're aware of a presidential race, but they're not really aware of who's running for state representative or perhaps even Congress. So they'll turn out and vote for president, and then you'll notice as you go further down the ballot, the drop-off in actual votes for different offices below president. And I think that relates more maybe to Republicans who don't feel as engaged in local politics because it's so dominated by one party that they don't feel that they have a representative. I mean, we only have a handful in the legislature. So I don't know how you get around that other than there is an important role in any democracy for a loyal opposition that acts as a check on the excesses of a majority.
Yes, it goes to the competition of ideas. And when you don't have that competition of ideas, the lesser ideas end up dominating or getting pushed through the legislature.
Right.
So it's really important that people understand that y'all need to vote and engage in that process.
Well, again, it's not, let me repeat, it's not only relates to voting, it relates to civic engagement, actually being aware, because the worst thing that can happen is that you just have a voter, whether it's Republican or Democrat, that goes to vote for president, and then they look at the rest of the ballot and they either leave it blank or they just vote reflexively for the party that they identify with.
Well, you're right. Now, I would say that one of the reasons that I sort of encourage people to do the mail-in ballot is because then they can get their ballot in the mail and actually sit down and take a look at what the candidates' positions are on various issues, what their knowledge, their competence, and identify those people that they feel could competently represent their values and their principles.
There's a pitfall with voting by mail, and that is this relates to how we conduct campaigns and how we advertise, how we communicate with voters with voter contact, direct mail, for example. And that is the time frame in which people are making their decision. Now, you have a 30-day window in terms of when your mail ballots are sent out, 30 days in advance of an election. Well, a lot happens in that 30-day period, particularly, I suspect, on the high-level races, where there's more attention paid to them, so that people have made their decision early based on one set of circumstances or bits of information, perceptions that may be altered over the course of the next 21 to 30 days. So you have here's what happens when you look at the pattern of mail voting is that the ballots go out from the Department of Elections.
I really appreciate you going over this, by the way.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate the validation. So what happens is that you have a burst of ballots being returned. These are the hardcore partisans on each side. They know who they want to vote for. They're not going to change. They are doing their civic duty. Then there's a lag. And so it begins like a little surge that becomes a tsunami towards the last 10 days when people are actually crystallizing their decision making and sending the ballots in. So it makes it difficult, particularly when you're running for a campaign, if you have, and we're reaching this point where you have parity between election day voters and vote by mail households, becomes very tricky about how we advertise or how we contact these people and what information is provided, because some people have made up their decision long before the election.
Well, don't you agree, though, that a lot of those people, whether they voted on paper or they voted at the ballot booth, would still probably make the same decisions because they're sort of entrenched?
Well, certainly the hardcore partisans that I described that are the early deciders, or in my case, I decided who I would vote for in 2016 in 1968.
Okay.
So, 'cause, in other words, I'm a partisan Republican.
Okay.
So there's a whole group of people that, and this is particularly important on the lower level races. That is the races for state house, state senate that don't get as much publicity.
Yes.
And even city council races don't get as much attention as the people are running for mayor, president, or
Yes.
U.S. Senate.
Especially during a presidential election.
Presidential election's very tough.
Yes.
The good thing about a presidential election is it brings out more people because you generate more interest and more turnout. But it's still problematical for somebody running for a lesser office because you're competing for attention.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, as somebody who's been a former candidate, I found that keeping the voters engaged was really difficult, and and the turnout was so low. I mean, if there had been a greater turnout, I would have had a greater opportunity to win.
Sure. And it also depends, and here's something that's counter-cyclical. It tends to be somewhat counter-cyclical in Hawaii politics. Traditionally on the mainland, Democrats benefit in a presidential year because they have a higher turnout of marginals. Those are people that are not engaged. They just see who's running for president. They want to vote for a Democrat, and then they reflexively vote the rest of the ballot. In Hawaii, we probably have, and I'm not sure that there's academic studies that will confirm this, but in looking at the patterns, it seems that we have slightly the reverse, in that we have more marginal Republicans who don't vote in those legislative races, but gosh darn it, they're going to turn out and vote for the Republican candidate for president.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is interesting in Hawaii.
Yeah.
There's a number of things about Hawaii that make it somewhat different from the mainland. And I think, to go back to your point, which is a very good one, one of the things that depresses voter turnout is the fact that we don't have competitive races.
Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. And let's talk a little bit more about what we can do to change that. Okay, I'm Chris Leatham, and this is The Economy in You, and we'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Carl Kimpania. I am the host of Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. You can see our show every Wednesday at noon at 12 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, as well as visiting YouTube and finding the link for the show there. The show is also aired on OC16. We look forward to seeing you on the show. We have many wonderful guests, including Joan Husted, Corey Rosenlee, where we talk about the very important issues of education for our keiki. We look forward to seeing you there. Mahalo.
Aloha, this is Maria Mera, and I'm here to invite you to my bilingual show, Viva Hawaii on Think Tech Hawaii, every other Monday at 3 p.m. We're here to inform, motivate, and entertain you. Join us. Hola, soy María Mera y estoy aquí para invitaros a mi show bilingüe Viva Hawaii en Think Tech Hawaii cada 2 lunes a las 3 de la tarde. Estamos aquí para informaros, motivaros y entreteneros. Apuntaros.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and welcome back to The Economy in You. Today's guest is Harvey Hukari. Harvey is a political consultant here in Hawaii that works a lot with the Republicans.
Mostly Republicans,
Mostly
some
Republicans.
nonpartisan candidates. As I mentioned earlier, I have done work for former Mayor Mufi Hanneman and his 2 successful campaigns for mayor. So.
Okay. Now, we were talking a little bit when we went to commercial break that it's a little challenging because of the sort of very sort of heavy, I guess, or the imbalance between the Democrats and the Republicans and the representation, the way that's sort of lopsided toward the Democrats. And this is one of the things where a lot of us who are maybe leaning a little bit more to the conservative side would like to see more competition and see the Republicans do better and be more organized when they're running their campaigns.
Well, it's not comforting right now in terms of telling you that this is a cyclical pattern that is likely to change over time. And that is, there was a point not that long ago when Republicans were competitive both on a legislative level and we've had 2 Republican congressional representatives, Pat Psyche, Charles DeJoux.
Yes.
And we've had a Republican mayor, we actually have had a Republican mayor in Frank Fosse, but nonpartisan office. But we've also had a Republican governor in our lifetime.
That's right.
So I don't think it's totally hopeless, but it requires a lot of elements to come into place, forces that we don't necessarily control. One of those is the image of the national party. And you're always fighting that because
Yes.
Hawaii is different in terms of the electorate, demographically, historically. It is different. And for better or worse, we're affected as Republicans. So speaking as a Republican, we're
Right,
affected by what happens on the national level.
Well, we are, and then also too, I think how we brand ourselves here in the state of Hawaii is an imperative as well. You know, I see the Republican Party here as being a little bit more moderate than, say, the mainland. We have a lot of constituents that are very, you know, very conservative, very evangelical. The thing that I have seen is that they don't necessarily show up at the polls.
Correct.
When we were talking about same-sex marriage, there were lots of folks who were very concerned about same-sex marriage who showed up at the legislature to provide testimony, but then when it came to vote in a conservative legislature, they were missing in action.
Right.
So now the question, I still, in my mind, I ask myself, well, why? If they were so impassioned to show up and address this issue, why wouldn't they show up at election time to engage and be, you know, and put forth their vote to help conservative candidates gain a seat at the table?
I don't know that I can make excuses, the rationales for evangelical behavior, other than to say I'm not really surprised by people that their only motivation is a single issue. And if that's the case, they don't care about other bills, other legislation, public policies, building better roads or improving, whatever it is.
Yes.
If they're simply consumed by the single issue, then anything that draws attention away from that or is not in line with that specific issue, they're not really that interested and that motivated. And I've been through this before, both with a number of campaigns where people say, well, the key to this is getting the evangelicals to turn out. Well, good. Go find them and turn them out, because I've never seen it happen. So
yeah, that's and you know, and of course when we get working on legislation, now I've worked on legislation for many years, working to make forms to the judicial, the judiciary. I've also worked on bills that had to do with environmental issues, and you know, I found a lot of times that people on the polar end of an issue will show up at the legislature to provide testimony. The sort of philosophical, or those folks in the medium who can sort of address the issue philosophically will just absorb whatever decisions are made. They don't really engage at that level, and sometimes it's to their disadvantage, because when you have people at polar ends trying to address an issue, you don't necessarily get the kind of result that's in the best interest of everyone. It tends to take on a lot of gyrations that aren't really.
And consensus is one of the keys to an effective democracy.
That's right.
An effective system.
Yes.
And when you have the zealots on either side, I think it also right now reflects the current political environment where there's so much polarization driven by both the left and the right that it's difficult for a moderate, and my gosh, you can be a right-wing conservative and not be conservative enough for some people, and similarly on the left at the same phenomenon that you're witnessing.
Find me somebody, anybody, who will be so conservative to the right that they're not going to catch any abuse or any criticism. I just don't think you can find a candidate that sits that far to the right nor to the left.
Well, here's the other part of the problem or the challenge that you face is that frequently the ideologues are talking in abstract terms. And the middle, and I suspect that the country is still somewhat center-right, let's say, but it's not as ideologically driven. And certainly in Hawaii, I think people have other concerns rather than social issues that are more practical. They're not abstract, they're not philosophical, they're real. It's the roads are bad, or we need to air condition the schools, whatever it is.
Yeah, the traffic is horrible.
Yeah, the traffic is horrible. We need to,
well, you know, and there was somebody who had, I don't know exactly who had said it, but he said, just because you don't choose to engage in politics doesn't mean politics won't engage you. And so I think a lot of people don't necessarily find that they have a desire to engage in politics, but it is to their own, I guess, to their own demise, because eventually, if bad decisions are made, if poor policies are implemented, it hurts all of us.
Yes.
You know.
And the irony, of course, is that there's been, over the last 20 years, at least in my experience here, the proliferation of neighborhood boards and little commissions and various committees
Yes.
and committee upon committee.
Uh-huh.
And in some respects, that sort of drags down the process, doesn't it? Or slows down the process.
You know, I went to a neighborhood board meeting last night, and it was a nice neighborhood board meeting, and they talked about a lot of things, but you know, they didn't really have any power. They make recommendations, and they may approve or endorse something, but they don't really have any power. But of course, a lot of people get called in, and there's discussion of issues. But you know, for example, in Waikiki, I mean, I don't know what the population of Waikiki is, but it's got to be, you know,
It's 20,000 residents.
20,000 residents.
Yeah, 70% occupied dwellings, 30% unoccupied.
And you got 50 people who show up. You know, that's the turnout at a neighborhood board meeting.
Yeah.
You know, and so the percentage of people who are actually taking the time to understand what's going on in their community, it's still a very minute percentage of the overall population.
Right.
And of course, now that information, we try to disseminate that information through television, through like Olelo and like here at Think Tech. But I asked people, you know, do you watch any of these things? And a lot of folks just, you know, maybe we're not, you know, we don't have a high entertainment value. We do, but we do have important information that we're trying to disseminate to the community.
Well, there's another aspect to this. I keep saying that, using that same phrase, but consider how we have constricted our news sources in the sense that we no longer have competitive newspapers. We have combined or collapsed television news, and it's worked out fine. I mean, it's a good quality product, but we have fewer outlets. And with the result of the trend towards the internet and people getting news and information off the internet, the influence of the daily newspaper, now only one obviously, the one newspaper, is diminished.
Yes.
And so where it used to be an opinion leader and the source of information, there are multiple sources of information.
Well, Facebook is probably now, for a lot of young people, the primary source of information about what's going on in the community.
A lot of political information is communicated through Facebook. That's correct.
Yes. But you know, whenever I look at Facebook and I look at the comments, I see a lot of hate mongering or you know, sort of negative commentary. I don't really see anything that's it's rare. I will say rare that I'll see something constructive or helpful in a discussion about how to resolve something or ideas to make, you know, enhance an idea somebody's put forth. I just generally see a lot of bashing that goes on. And so I'm wondering, you know, maybe we need to change our paradigm, or we need to figure out ways that the communication is more positive and less rancorous when we have these social media platforms that we're using as our primary means of understanding what's going on in the area, in our community. I think, you know, and I look at these issues and I think to myself, okay, how do I get more people engaged? And you know, sometimes, and it's very frustrating. I look what the Republican Party is doing. I'm looking at the conversation that's going on between Rubio and Cruz and the Donald and the rancor that's going on there. And I'm wondering if that is turning people off also, or you know, is that kind of rancor creating a problem? Is it creating a perception that, you know, that people find so distasteful that they don't want to engage?
There's the conundrum. The conflict is what drives ratings, and the relative ratings the relative size of audiences between the Republican debates and Democrat debates is extraordinary. Of course, we've had more debates.
We've had a lot of debates this year.
And I'm not sure they've all been helpful, although the debates are becoming more interesting as the field has winnowed, so that it's much more interesting to hear 4 people than hear 16 people yelling for attention.
And well, and I think part of the when I listen to the debates, I hear a lot of back and forth, the sort of ad hominem attacks, but I don't necessarily get a feeling that I'm learning anything or being edified in a way that's helpful, that I can make a decision. I'm hearing principles and policies or ideas, but I'm not necessarily hearing anything that's concrete or tangible that I can say, okay, here's somebody that's really putting forth an agenda that is well thought out and well conceived.
Yeah, I think you're a much narrower audience, or you have a greater appetite for policy than the general electorate. General electorate wants to take a measure of a candidate, what impresses them. And also, if you've got basically 3 or 4 issues that seriously concern everybody, whether it's terrorism, the economy, illegal immigration,
the wall,
they want to hear an answer.
Yes.
They got problems, and the country's got problems. What are the answers? And they don't want to hear abstract policy statements.
Yes.
And so that's why Trump has a certain visceral appeal. Whether he's right or wrong, he has visceral appeal.
Well, he does. I think one of the reasons that he has appeal, it doesn't feel like he's coached. I would say that there is this sense that he shoots from the hip, which I think a lot of people now have seen what coached politicians look like. They expect politicians to be coached, and here's somebody who steps up and just says what he thinks.
Well, keep this in mind too. I've had this discussion with other consultants about the fact that there are recurrent cycles of populism in American history, and within, dare I say, our collective lifetime, you've had the Dixiecrats in 1948, which was a regional party, regional phenomena, but it still had its populist base. You had George Wallace in 1968. You had Ross Perot in 1992 and 96. You had the Tea Party in 2010. And then the spawn of the Tea Party becomes, Donald Trump in some respects.
And Cruz.
So this happens over time. And you go back to the 19th century, with William Jennings Bryan, but this is not radically new. So,
yeah.
But does it sustain itself?
Yeah, that's a question. Let's talk about that. We're going to take another commercial break, and we'll be right back. I'm Chris Leatham, and this is The Economy and You. See you soon.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii. And it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us. Hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Zero back. We're live. Hi, I'm Chris Leatham. This is The Economy and You, and today's guest is Harvey. Say your last name.
Harvey Harlowe Hukari.
Harlowe Hukari, and Hukari is not a Japanese last name.
No,
It's
actually, I'm half English and half Finnish.
half Finnish.
Yes.
Okay.
But I'm glad to be mistaken for.
Well, there's
Something
Hukari,
else.
and I think there's a Hikari.
There is a Hikari, absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that's not you.
that's not me.
Okay, well, Harvey, we've been talking about sort of the way things are going and talking about voting, but let's talk a little bit about the local Hawaii Republican Party. Where do we go from here? We didn't do so well last time around, and are we doing anything different to give our candidates a better opportunity to present their?
We're at a low point right now, and with the absence of an elected official, elected official on a higher level than the state legislature. We don't have any city councilmen in Oahu, and obviously not the mayor's office. But historically, at least in the last 10, 20 years, the way we win elections as Republicans is when Democrats screw up. And that...
Doesn't that mean that we should all be having a very strong Republican Party at this point?
But you have to find candidates. There's certainly districts that could be won.
Yes.
This is not the most Democrat environment in America by any means.
Yeah, no,
And,
that's right.
So, and you have a I think, a cultural conservatism to tap into. But Richard Barreca, the columnist for the Star Advertiser, had a very good point I made last year about Republicans can't win elections by telling people in Hawaii how terrible things are. That is to say, it's a comfortable lifestyle here.
Yes.
You're part of if you're local, you're part of a much larger interwoven community, intimate community. It's mostly sunny, and you've got the beach, and
Yes,
the weather doesn't
yes, yes,
change
yes,
much.
yes.
And so you have to be able to win races based on whether or not the incumbents that you're going after screw up in some way. And,
Okay.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we had Linda Lingle for 2 years, 2 terms as a Republican governor, as the previous Democratic administration screwed up. Secondly, this is a political landscape which requires personal contact to a greater extent than in other states.
It is.
And
Yeah,
that
that's
requires, whether it's the door-to-door contact, but certainly visibility, whether it's a lot of sign waving, whatever it is, it requires that. And I think, too, keep in mind that the basic or 2 principal determinants of voting behavior, like when people go to the polls, before
Okay.
you get to issues,
All right, okay.
before you get to personalities, is name identification, or name familiarity, and partisanship. Those are the 2 main factors.
Now, partisanship in Hawaii, of course, is is one of those things that I found interesting. Just looking at the history of Hawaii. You know, we were Republican at one point.
Yes.
In the past, the unions came in. They did a very good job of organizing and bringing people to the voting booth.
And taking advantage of Republican mistakes.
Yes. So, do you see any sort of any mistakes that are sort of obvious mistakes at this point that might
Well,
help the Republicans sort of identify some key things where we could use to our advantage?
there's a what I call a popular impulse in the electorate. It's just a natural instinct, and that is people want things to work. So when Ross Perot comes in with his, here's the deal, and if I can channel Ross Perot for a minute,
Sure.
Here's the deal.
I like Ross
we're
Perot.
Here's what we're going to do. That you offer us an actual solution, then you attract attention, you attract support. So you got to have a solution as opposed to a philosophical point that you want to make by running for office. I think there's enormous opportunities related to people's frustration with the daily task of getting to work, traffic, certainly
Yes.
on the west side of Oahu.
It is absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
I lived over there for a while. It was just,
And everybody's got their stories.
my goodness, yes.
And you can look at something, and it's not simply symbolic, but Aloha Stadium. You know, why that's allowed to deteriorate, why things can't be done to fix that. And when you see the the Pro Bowl, people wavering about whether or not it's going to come back to Hawaii, and the embarrassment of the facility itself, the problem with the soccer match being called off because of the conditions of the field. These are all embarrassments that don't help either self-image or the economy of the state.
well, we have so many challenges, and I think there's a lot of issues here. You know, everything from the brain drain. You know, we have a lot of young people. We educate them. We do have some really good schools here. We have some really smart kids. They go to Harvard, Stanford, Yale, MIT, but they don't come back to Hawaii because the opportunities for them aren't necessarily here. So if we were able to attract the best and the brightest, those are the people who are going to generate new opportunities in technology and pharmaceuticals and so on if they were able to come back and do business in Hawaii. I think one of the challenges for us is that we have not created the environment conducive to their success. You know, and we have not made those kinds of investments in the infrastructure necessary to bring technology to Hawaii. I think another thing, of course, that still eats at us is the Jones Act. The cost of bringing goods to and from Hawaii. We've allowed a small group of unions of union people hold us hostage, the rest of the state hostage, because they're going to get these 6-figure jobs that benefit them, but at the expense of everybody else. I think that really hurts us as a state. We have black eyes such as the super ferry. That was a huge black eye on this state. Trying to talk to somebody now about bringing millions of dollars and investing in a big project like the Super Ferry today is almost impossible, because obviously there are too many opportunities for somebody to undermine and sabotage somebody who might actually bring a competitive innovation to Hawaii.
I was involved with the GMO campaign in Maui in the last election cycle. I was not involved with the designing the message. I happened to handle the production for the people that were trying to protect the industry on Maui. So you look at that result, which was about 1,000 vote margin in favor of essentially banning GMOs. You know the issue.
Right.
And I thought to myself, now, apart from the arguments, which you can make on both sides, and again, I was not involved with designing or crafting the message in this particular campaign.
Yes.
But what kind of message are you sending to anybody else that wants to invest in agriculture or agriculture research and development when you have an extraordinary advantage, as you do in Maui and Molokai, with the climates and the fact that you can do 3 growing cycles to experiment? The whole issue of the telescope.
Yeah, the telescope. That's another one.
Yeah.
And we see this. We seem to be able to do this, this kind of craziness over and over again, where we have some issue that really benefits us, but because they're sort of the entities that necessarily don't like it are empowered to frustrate and create, and of course cost more and more money to get something like the telescope implemented.
Correct. Yeah.
The Super Ferry, same problem. We had Matson and Young Brothers and so on that, obviously were going to be hurt by the Super Ferry. So I think there was, in my mind, what I saw was that they were helping to undermine the success of that enterprise. So,
my point would be that it goes beyond the specifics of the issue, which
It
is
does.
why I don't get involved in pro-GMO, anti-GMO.
Right.
I'm just thinking that, my gosh, we have enormous resources here in Hawaii that other states do not have, and part of its geography, part of its climate, and we're just why are these not being used?
yes.
I mean,
And look at the location that we're in. I mean, we are in a fabulous location. We are where East meets West. We should be ahead in the technology game. We should be ahead in creating new business opportunities. I look at places like Singapore. Singapore has done very well for itself.
well, technology requires, to grow technology or to have a technology center, look at where others have developed. Silicon Valley, of course. Proximity to intellectual capital,
Right.
right? The talent, with
Yes.
the great universities that are concentrated in the Bay Area. Similarly, in Austin, and now they hate calling it Silicon Beach, but parts of Southern California.
Yes.
And you could have the same thing here, because there's no real geographical disadvantage when you think about it. You can grow a technology industry anywhere.
You can grow a technology not only here and gain an advantage because of the ability to have communications on both in the East and the West, and sort of be that crossroads. Now, I'm a software developer. I don't know if everybody knows that, but some people do. And I develop software. I've spent 2 decades developing software for companies like Intel, University of California, CTEL Corporation, some other large corporations. And Hawaii does have intellectual talent, but it seems like we're not tapped into, or we're not provided the resources. Now, that I say historically, now it's gotten better the last couple of years, but I think technology jobs definitely enhance our economic opportunities. And when you talk about where there have been mistakes made, I would say this is probably a big area. I think we just haven't done a good job of really letting people know that the ball has been dropped. We should be much further along than we are. Problem is you don't necessarily there's sort of I think when people lose something, that's more apparent than never having actually achieved something.
Fair point. I'd also say that there has been no real political leadership on that issue. You would think that would be part of every governor's state of the state message to encourage or develop those kinds of industries. I mean, when talking
Yes.
about high tech.
Yes.
And we were talking about this idea that the West is over here, the East is over here, and I've heard that speech delivered on opening day at the legislature. I don't know how many times. I mean, I can remember back in 1986.
Well, I started the speech
Dickie
a long time
Wong
ago. They've been stealing it from me all through the years. So, what can I say?
Senator Dickie Wong getting up on the floor in 1986, opening the legislature. Yeah, we're between East and West.
Yes.
And so I'm sorry, I get a little frustrated myself. I've been in the business too long. Maybe. I don't.
Well, let me ask you, Harvey, is there any message that you'd like to put out there? We've got last couple of minutes here. Is there anything that you would like to offer to our Hawaii community?
Well, Republicans don't give up hope.
Yes.
For one thing, because there are a lot of opportunities for Republicans to get elected and to serve, and it goes back to an earlier point: is that you take advantage of the mistakes the Democrats have made or their failures, and try and run good campaigns. And come up with policies that people find attractive or understand, and don't get too abstract. Don't start going off on philosophical binges or tangents.
So this goes to keep it simple?
Well, part of it is keep it simple, but I think to reiterate a previous point, there is that natural impulse of people really don't care who's in charge as long as things work. So if you can demonstrate competence in contrast to your opponents, and it goes back to the example of lingual success, at least in the first election.
Yes.
You can demonstrate competence and give people a sense that things will get solved, or problems will get solved, things will get accomplished. I think you'll do very well. And frankly, we need to have a good, healthy, loyal opposition in the Republican Party.
I hear here.
Important for Hawaii.
Well, thank you very much for being on Think Tech Hawaii.
Yeah, I may
Thank
come
you.
back.
All right, Harvey, very good. Well, I'm Chris Leatham. This has been The Economy and You. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back again next week. Aloha.